Jon Stewart and Peter Beinart are two Jews with Stockholm syndrome, where they justify the actions of the anti-Jewish aggressors, quite frankly. They had a conversation on Jon Stewart's show, which was pretty painful to watch. Peter Beinart, who's written a book, Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza. I really think the title should have been Being Jewish After the Worst Massacre Against Jews Since the Holocaust. And what's happening in Gaza with the IDF showing utter surgical precision is utterly morally justified. But John and Peter in their conversation seem to think that it's morally abhorrent. I want to unpack some of the things that they said here and explain the moral vacuousness of what they are saying. Let's have a watch. So, Honest Reporting wrote about this, and they said, two self-tokenizing Jews walk onto a talk show. Jon Stewart sat down with journalist anti-Zionist Jew Peter Beinart for an interview on The Daily Show. For 80 minutes straight, the two called Israeli Jews the oppressors, ignoring who started the war, erasing Hamas from the conversation, and blaming Israel for its own trauma. So here are their worst takes.
Wanted people around the world. I'm not saying that what's happening in Gaza is the equivalent of the Holocaust or anything like that. But what's happening in Gaza is bad enough.
It may be a slow-mo. You know, I saw an article in the Times, Bret Stephens, I think, and his argument was this can't be a genocide because Israel's so strong they could kill them much quicker.
Right.
And I thought, well, that's the most cynical description of a military siege and a purposeful starvation that I've ever seen in my life.
Right. I mean, even Israel's leading human rights organization, B'Tselem, has just come out with a report saying they believe this is genocide. So it seems to me, if we want to remember our history, if we want to honor those in our own families and of our people who were slaughtered and who were genocided, who were starved to death while nobody in the world cared, our obligation is to care. Yeah.
If we want to want to honour the victims of the Holocaust, then we stop modern-day Nazis like Hamas. Thank you very much, Peter. He refers to B'Tselem. They're another group of Jews who have Stockholm Syndrome, who justify the actions of the anti-Semites, of the modern Nazis of Hamas, and say that anything we do to protect ourselves is somehow abhorrent. They're the ones risking the Jewish state, Israel is? Not Hamas, not Hezbollah, not Iran, but it's Israel. And then he says, you know, it's unbelievable what's happening in Gaza. It's unacceptable. And, you know, they're just killing them slowly. Well, nearly about 55,000 Gazans have killed in this tragic, bloody war. And it looks like almost about half of them will get the full figures clear and will be calibrated as the war ends. But in previous wars, when Israel's given data and details based on intelligence, they've turned out to be largely accurate. And once again, what we're seeing so far from the information we have is that it's looking like a roughly 1-to-1 ratio of combatant to non-combatant killed, where Israel has managed, despite Hamas embedding itself in civilian populations, has managed to dance around all of that and target Hamas and move civilians to particular zones where they're not going to be caught in the fighting. Hamas do all they can to jeopardize that. They steal aid. So Israel creates a new corridor, but Hamas still try to jeopardize that, which is why there's been some shooting and violence at some of these, even though millions of Gazans otherwise have been fed because of that. And yet, despite all of that, what Israel does is unacceptable. The point about if Israel wants to do a genocide, they could do it a lot quicker, that's not a cynical point. That's the absolute truth. If Israel wants to do genocide, they wouldn't be putting in all these measures. Yes, war is always going to be bloody, but all these measures to move civilian populations to specific zones, to create new aid corridors, why would they be doing all of that? Why would they be sacrificing hundreds of their own soldiers' lives in order to limit civilian casualties on the ground? If it was about they're just trying to do it more slowly. He actually dishonours the memory and the sacrifice of those IDF soldiers who have laid down their lives or lost limbs in order to limit civilian casualties on the other side. A policy of which, by the way, I question, given that the majority of the population, according to data, support what Hamas did on October 7th.
If they're under oppression, if they live under conditions that even Israel's own human rights organizations called apartheid, they are suffering radical amounts of violence all the time, even before October 7th. Do we think, when we think about all these kids in Gaza who are watching their parents starving to death, who are watching dozens of their family members being killed, is that good for Israel? Is that good for Israeli Jews in the long term? How you treat people has an impact on how they treat you, right? And if you want Israeli Jews to be safe, Palestinians also have to be safe.
As if Hamas is misunderstood, Honest Reporting Right, as if they'd stop murdering Jews if Israel was nicer. Is he really that naive? Has he learned nothing from 35 years of shootings, suicide bombings and rocket attacks? In fact, the very act of giving Gaza autonomy and self-determination led to October 7th. So this stupidity of, oh, well, if we fight back, we're just going to create more terrorists. Okay, great. Well, you know what? Who were disproportionately killed and taken hostage on October 7th? It was the peaceniks, the far lefties in Israel who were on the south, on the border, trying to take in Gazans to give them work, to help them with hospital visits, all the rest of it. And they were disproportionately murdered on October 7th. That theory, that being nice to them is the answer, is demonstrably false.
What Hamas did on October 7th was despicable. These were war crimes. But the thing we have to ask ourselves is, how does Israel react? How do America react when Palestinians fight for their freedom in an ethical way, in a way that respects the lives of Israelis? In 2018, there was a mass march, overwhelmingly nonviolent, in Gaza. Palestinians did exactly what we wanted them to do. They behaved like Gandhis. And did people applaud? No, Israel put sharpshooters with American weapons on the fence and shot thousands of people, so many people that the Gaza had to start an amputee soccer team after that. What Hamas...
As Honest Reporting Right, as an example of peaceful Palestinian protest, Beinart presents the 2018 Great March of Return, but he admits that these marches were violent, supported by Hamas, and featured grenades, fire kites, and attempted fence breaches.
I was raised in the story of Israel being necessary for the safety of Jews, which, by the way, if that's the case, we have a much bigger problem in this world than anything else. The idea that a people have to have an armed fortress of a homeland just to be safe living in this world is an absolute failure of humanity in the first place. I was raised.
Well, he's right about that. But why is that the case? Why is Israel a fortress? Because the world has always had a problem with the Jews, always pushed back against the Jews, whether they were in exile or in their homeland. Why that is a much bigger topic for discussion, John. But the answer, therefore, is not a dissolution of Israel or a caving to the anti-Israel Palestinian mob, which only wants to seek the destruction of the Jews, as previous nations and empires have for centuries.
And look, make up your own minds. You're not going to, us two talking about it's not going to do that much. But Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza is available now. Stewart-Beinart, thank you for being here.
So it's just just pushing this book, Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza. I think for most people who are sane, their Judaism and their Jewishness has only strengthened and become prouder in this time, given Israel's determination, persistence, resoluteness in the face of so much hostility, fighting the war with so much moral uprightness despite the evil of the other side. You know, there was one actual other section that I found that I wanted to raise that I also thought was a great example of the just moral stupidity of John and Peter and what they're saying, where they talked about Judaism. Have a watch of this.
We are two people that I think see this situation very similarly. Right. I obviously see it from a more secular perspective because I am, even before Gaza, a bad Jew. Like, first night of Passover for me was like meatball Parmesan hero. Like, I was not good. I was not good. But you see, all of our holidays, the whole entire ethos for me of being Jewish, and I don't doubt that there are people that have a radically different interpretation than I do, but it's all about like, we were about to be wiped out. We were in a cave. We had 3 days of oil. And then suddenly the Maccabees overcame it all. Or Purim, Esther, she was almost destroyed by Haman and the Jewish people with, but she went to Mordecai, and now we wear costumes and do, like, it was always like, oh, they almost got us, but wait.
Right.
It's more complicated than that, isn't it?
It's true, because if you read the Hebrew Bible, if you read the Talmud, what you see is that our religious texts describe us in the full range of humanity. We're human beings. Nothing human is alien to us. We can be horribly victimized, and our texts talk about that. But the end of the book of Esther, from which the Purim story comes, also ends with a massacre by Jews of the Jews' enemies. The story of Hanukkah doesn't, and the story of the Chazmonaim, who became the Maccabees, became in power. Mm-hmm. It moves from them liberating the Jewish people to them becoming oppressors themselves. So part of recognizing us as human, as Jews, as fully human, is recognizing that we are capable of being victims and being victimizers, and we have to recognize that in order to prevent us from falling into the trap of thinking that every single situation is the equivalent of what was happening in the Tsarist Russia or in Nazi Germany. Right. In some situations, the power dynamic is reversed. In Israel-Palestine, it's Jews who all enjoy legal supremacy and citizenship, and Palestinians who are denied based.
Oh, this is so absurd. Sorry, I had to show this because this really needs unpacking. First of all, when Jon Stewart talks about, well, we talk about these times of old where we were under threat, but, we're creating a narrative that isn't really true. Literally in living memory, we saw the worst genocide in human history. In fact, the term genocide was coined as a result of the Holocaust. This exterminationism against the Jews is not some ancient biblical historical relic. It's a living reality. It was a living reality on October 7th and throughout so much of the Middle East over the last 70, 80 years, and in Europe before that. And we're seeing it rising again today. Don't tell me that it's just a figment of the Jewish people's imagination. It's what Iran has wanted to do, to destroy Israel. They're saying it. Oh, it's rubbish. Yes, Israel's finally able to fight back. That's something you should celebrate. It's still against incredible odds. And he's saying, well, the lesson of the Torah is, and the Bible is, like in the Purim story, we were threatened with annihilation, but then we committed massacres. This actually exposes their utterly broken moral compass. What happened was there was a decree against the Jews, for the Jews to be wiped out. People had the right, according to the legislation of Haman, to kill the Jews on a particular day. And the Jews issued a new decree, or rather Mordecai and Esther managed to get a new decree issued that said the Jews were allowed to defend themselves. So what happened on that day is that the Jews fought back and defeated and fought their anti-Semitic enemies. But it was self-defense. But in Peter's eyes, this is a lesson in we can be evil as well. No. The Torah tells us there is a time for peace and there is a time for war. And war is, when it is justified, it is justified. This notion that it can never be justified, which seems to be what Peter and John indulge in, is utterly morally bankrupt. I think it was the Talmud that says, if you are kind to the cruel, then you'll end up being cruel to the kind. And it also says, if someone rises to kill you, rise up and kill them first. This is basic sanity. And if you don't understand that, if you don't understand who Israel's dealing with, you'll never get sent to this. His notion is that the Palestinians are some kind of underdog and that Israel's this evil aggressor here. Once you understand that the Palestinians are merely a pawn for a far greater Middle Eastern and global campaign to destroy Israel, you'll see that Israel's actually the underdog. They're just concocting a narrative to make it seem like Israel is the Goliath against the David of the Palestinians. Actually, they're just the pawns, the Palestinians. They don't actually care about Palestinian statehood, the Palestinians or the surrounding Arab Islamic entities. They're just concerned with destroying Israel. So Israel maintains itself as the David, not the Goliath. You need to understand who you're dealing with. Israel's enemies will the Jews' destruction, as they have done for centuries. And by the way, we've actually released a new documentary about Iran's ambitions to destroy Israel and the theology that is driving their very mission and the regime. Have a watch of the trailer. The Islamic Republic of Iran. For over 4 decades, its leaders have stood defiantly, their voices thundering through Tehran's streets, chanting death to Israel and waging a relentless war on the West. But what fuels this fierce, unyielding hatred? Is it politics? A grab for regional power? Or something even more profound? A theology that casts Israel and the West as cosmic enemies in a divine battle for the end of days. In this JTV Plus documentary, we embark on a journey to unravel the apocalyptic beliefs at the core of Iran's revolution. We'll uncover the sacred Shia doctrines that prophesy a world reborn through chaos, where a hidden redeemer, the Mahdi, will rise to vanquish evil, with Israel and America as the ultimate foes. We'll dive deep into the mystical visions of a global Islamic order, where martyrdom and jihad pave the path to divine victory. We'll explore how these ancient beliefs shape Iran's every move, from its fiery rhetoric to its deadly proxy wars. From the revolutionary sermons of Ayatollah Khomeini, who ignited a nation, to the shadow wars of spies, cyber attacks, and missiles that have pushed the region to the brink. We'll trace the arc of a regime bent on reshaping history, and we'll reveal the climactic moment when Israel struck back with Operation Rising Lion, a daring, high-stakes operation that shook the world and redefined the conflict. This is not just a story of a nation, but of a creed that seeks to rewrite the future, a conflict that threatens to engulf us all. Join us as we expose the hidden truths behind what Iran sees as its sacred mission, its unrelenting rage, and the battle for our world's destiny. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.